Good evening and welcome. This is Newsfirst in Focus. Over the years, we've interviewed several individuals in terms of international politics to speak about what is going on in the world in terms of peace, stability, and the way individuals and countries should move forward. This evening, I have a special guest with me, an individual who's going to talk about why Palestinians need to be separated and why Palestine needs a separate state. An individual who is an Israeli Jew. Interestingly, he's the author of the book, The General's Son, The Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. I want to introduce this individual as an individual who came to Sri Lanka to speak about the rights of the Palestinians. A very good evening to you, Miko, and nice to have you on the show. Starting off, introduce yourself briefly to our viewers, what you do and why you are here.
I am an Israeli writer and activist for the Palestinian cause, and I've been invited to come and speak here for the International Solidarity Day with Palestine, an event that's taking place here in Sri Lanka, and to be the speaker for this event.
Interestingly, you are an Israeli Jew, as you correctly pointed out. However, speaking about the Palestinian rights does not connect.
True.
What made you change your mind, Miko?
Well, I think the title of my book speaks to that. The two parts of the title. One is the general's son, so having been raised in a family which is very patriotic, and having a father as a general. And the other part is my journey as an Israeli into Palestine. Is a journey from a sphere that is completely segregated and sees and knows no Palestinians to a sphere of the people who are the natives of the country and are the oppressed. So it's a very short geographical journey, but it's a very difficult journey in terms of your emotions and in terms of the sense of fear and so forth. What made this happen is several things that I relay in the book. The way I was educated, stories that I heard from my mother, living in Jerusalem as she did in 1948 when Israel was established. My father's career and his thinking process after he retired from the military and speaking for Palestinian rights and so on. So it's not one thing, but it was a process that I went through. And then probably the final push, or the strongest push to become involved and to understand the Palestinian issue was when my sister's little girl was killed in a suicide attack in Jerusalem by Palestinians. And that was the strongest drive for me to take the journey from this very privileged sphere as an Israeli Jew in Israel to understand and to the sphere where Palestinians live, which again geographically is not very far, but is a very difficult journey psychologically and so forth.
You said your sister was killed in a Palestinian suicide.
Her daughter.
Your sister's daughter was killed in a Palestinian suicide attack.
Yes.
Again, the story does not connect.
Yeah, true. I mean, it's perhaps not your usual story, but
if you tell me,
that's why there's a book, and that's why I'm here to speak. But I think I'll give you an example. Something that my sister said after her daughter was killed. She was asked about this. She said, the first question she was asked, how do we punish the Palestinians, and how do we find who's responsible, and so on? How many of them should we kill to punish? And her response was, look, no real mother would want to see more people die. No real mother would want to see this kind of grief fall upon another mother. Don't talk to me about killing more people. In terms of who's responsible, she said, well, who is it that's keeping another nation oppressed, another nation under occupation? Who is it that is destroying Palestinian homes, killing Palestinian children, incarcerating thousands of Palestinian political prisoners? It is we as a society, we the Israelis. And she said, I hold the Israeli government responsible for my daughter's death, because this is what happens when you oppress another nation. This is the price that you pay. So for me personally, this was it affected me deeply. Of course, the fact that my niece was killed, but also my sister's reaction to that. And her entire family are all activists supporting the Palestinian cause. And I was living in America already at the time. I returned to America and I began this journey. First of all, meeting Palestinians for the first time. Even though I was born and raised in Jerusalem, I never met Palestinians because it's so segregated. The first time I met Palestinians was actually in the United States. And I talk about this in the book. I mentioned that my first my first encounter with Palestinians, my journey into Palestine, so to speak, began in the United States. I was almost 40 years old by then. So that was probably the biggest drive for me to get involved. And then once you learn the issue,
what is your ultimate objective, Miko? You speak of the rights of the Palestinians. You speak of suppression taking place in the state of Palestine and even Israel, for that matter. What are you looking at? What is your objective at the end of the day?
Well, this is not just my objective, but I believe that the objective in cases where you have injustice is to seek justice. The place where you have oppression, to end the oppression. And that is the reality that exists in Palestine today. Palestine has been under an oppressive, racist regime for 70 years, since the establishment of the State of Israel. All of the State of Israel is occupied Palestine. And so the objective is to end this regime, this oppressive, racist regime that exists in Palestine, that gives exclusive rights to people like myself, who are Jews, particularly Israeli Jews, and to afford equal rights and the same laws and the same protections to all the people who live under Israeli control, more than half of whom are Palestinians. The majority of the people that Israel controls are Palestinians, in fact. So the objective is to end that regime and replace it with a democracy.
We're talking about Israel, we're talking about Palestine, Miko. So we have across the board over 50% of Palestinians living in both countries. Why is the Israelis so strong across the world? And we're talking about a population, the Palestinians,
Yes.
who are more in numbers, who are more in what they can do in a country like Israel or even Palestine for that matter. However, Israeli lobbying is extremely strong.
Yes.
What is the reason behind this?
Well, first of all, let me just clarify. There is no Palestine that's separate from Israel. Israel and Palestine is the same country, and there really is no Palestinian state, although there is a quasi-state, which is the Palestinian Authority. But even they are under Israeli control. The Israeli lobby has been in effect, acting for the cause of Zionism, which is the colonizing of Palestine by Jews, for about 100 years. I mean, since before the State of Israel was established, there was a very strong, very dedicated group of diplomats, Jewish European diplomats, who believed in this cause. My grandfather was one of them. And they traveled around the world and they convinced leaders around the world, in America and in Europe, to support this idea of Jews, European Jews, colonizing Palestine. And they were very good at it. And to this day, when we talk about the Israeli lobby, whether in the United States or in Europe, they know how the system works, they know how to influence politics, and they're very effective. And so they are very effective at getting across the Israeli perspective.
So you mean to say, in other words, Palestinians are not effective in what they're doing?
Nobody is as effective as the Israeli lobby is. Nobody is. And certainly...
again, done by machines or human beings. We're talking about humans, we're not talking about machines.
No, we're talking
Everyone has the potential,
yes,
isn't it,
yes, that's
Miko?
true. That's true. I'm not excusing, I'm just saying this is the reality. The reality is that there has been an Israeli lobby in place for a very long time. They've been very, very active. They're ideologues. They're very strong in their beliefs, and that's what they've been doing.
Several years ago, we saw at the United Nations, the Palestinian president seemed very happy. He seemed victorious. The state of the Palestine came into being. However, according to what you are saying right now, it makes no sense. It is not yet a free country.
No, there is no state of Palestine. There is no place in Palestine where Palestinians are free. There is no such place in Palestine.
What makes you say that?
Because that is the reality. Every Palestinian in Palestine, regardless of where they live under the rules that are determined by the State of Israel, by the Israeli government. Even the Palestinian president, in order to travel from one Palestinian city to another, needs a permit from the Israeli army that he has to renew every 6 months. So even the Palestinian president lives under the rules of engagement that are determined by the State of Israel, and where he's allowed to go and where he's not allowed to go, and whether or not he's allowed to leave the country or not, is all determined by the State of Israel. There is no place in Palestine where Palestinians are free, and there is no state of Palestine, although there has been this new wave of recognizing the state of Palestine, which I believe has to do more with appeasing Israel and allowing this reality to continue than supporting Palestinians.
I'm cognizant that there are 3 laws in Israel. What governs the Palestinians living in Israel?
you've got the laws that govern the lives of Israeli Jews, which are very liberal. You know, I can come and go, I can do what I like there, I'm completely free.
Someone like you.
Someone like myself. There are the laws that govern the lives of Palestinians who have Israeli citizenship, and there are dozens of laws that discriminate specifically against them as a population. And there are the Palestinians who live in what is called the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, live under Israeli military law. So if I break the law in the West Bank, Israeli law, civil law, governs what happens to me. If a Palestinian in the exact same place makes the exact same offense, what determines what happens to him is completely different because it's governed by military law. And of course military law knows no rights or justice. So it's a reality where you can stand next to each other and you'll be governed by completely different laws because I am an Israeli Jew and the Palestinian is a Palestinian.
So there was no victory that was achieved at the United Nations several years ago?
No, it's hypocrisy. It's a charade. It's a complete charade. All this recognition of the Palestinian state is a complete charade by the way, European countries who have been playing this exact charade in other former colonies, like in Africa, like in other places where they pretend that there is independence, but in fact there isn't any independence. They still continue to pull the strings.
Again, it was the Palestinian president who said it's a victory achieved by the Palestinian people, and now you are saying that it was not the case. So who is fooling who?
Well, that's a very good question, but you have to ask yourself, this Palestinian president, who does he represent? And when was the last time Palestinians were permitted to go to elections? And even when they did go to elections, how many Palestinians were permitted to participate? And all of this is controlled by Israel. And we're talking about the Palestinians who are within Palestine, never mind the reality of 4 million Palestinians or 5 million Palestinians who live who are refugees, who do not get to participate in this process at all. So the fact that he is the Palestinian president, or so-called president, he's really the head of a authority which has very little authority. The Palestinian Authority, in fact, has maybe an authority of a small city council.
But you told me that you migrated to the U.S., to the state of California, at the age of...
It was about 25 years ago, so late 20s, early 30s, yeah.
Right. So you spoke of the role of the Palestinian president. At least the president of Palestine is living in Palestine. You were talking while you were in California about the rights of the Palestine.
Yeah.
Again, for me, the story does not connect.
Really? I mean, the people who opposed apartheid in South Africa had to live in South Africa? I'm sure you don't have to live in a country to know what happens there.
How would you know the suffering of the people of Palestine by not living in that country?
I think it would amaze me that somebody would have to live in the country in order to know the suffering of a people. You'd have to be quite ignorant not to know the suffering of the Palestinian people, in particular the Palestinian people, because we see the suffering on the news every single day. For example, last summer when Israel bombed Gaza, killing for 51 days, killing over 2,000 Palestinians, and this was broadcast live everywhere around the world. There's absolutely no question that Palestinians are being murdered by Israel, that Palestinians are being oppressed by Israel. Every bit of this information is well known. You don't have to be in Palestine in order to see it. In fact, I am shocked to hear that from time to time I do meet people who don't realize and don't recognize this, and even call the Israeli attacks on Gaza self-defense. So that is, I would reframe the question. I would say, how is it that there's anybody that is out of Palestine that is not supporting the Palestinian cause, knowing full well just how brutal the Israeli violence against the Palestinian really is? Now again, regarding the Palestinian president who you keep asking me about, I did not vote for him and I don't know him, and it's not my job to speak for him. So if you have any questions, you might want to ask him those questions.
You spoke of the Palestinian president and you spoke of his role, and you said that I don't know who he represents. That's why I posed that question to you, Miko. Having said that, 1993 was the Oslo Accord was signed between Israel and Palestine in the lawn of the White House under President Clinton's patronage. Has this changed the war between the two nations? Has this at least contributed for the better?
Well, that depends on who you're talking to. This contributed to Israel a great deal. The Oslo Accords allowed Israel to strengthen its hold on the Palestinians particularly in regards to the oppressive hold of the Palestinians. It allowed Israel greater control of the resources, and it brought the Palestinians yet another catastrophe. The Oslo Accords were a catastrophe for the Palestinians because it created the reality that exists there today is a direct result of the Oslo Accords, which, contrary to what many people thought, were actually supposed to lead to peace. In fact, they were designed to allow Israel more oppressive measures against the Palestinians.
If it was a catastrophe, why was it signed in the first place in 1993?
Well, I don't think people thought it would be a catastrophe. I think in 1993 many people were hopeful and thought that this was a promise, but this was a promise that led to catastrophe. And if we look at the people who led, the Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who was a war criminal, the American president, and we know that no American can be president unless they support the most vicious Israeli policies that exist, then I think if we take a look at those two people, we can already see that nothing good can come to the Palestinians as a result of a process that those two people support.
Who are the West supporting right now? The Western world. Who are they supporting?
They're supporting the European governments. The Western governments support Israel 100%. They profit from the State of Israel. They profit from their dealings with the State of Israel, and they profit from the war against the Palestinians, because Israel buys billions of dollars worth of weapons from the United States, from Germany, from England, and so forth. Other European states have defense deals with Israel, in which they profit as well. So the European governments are actually supporting Israel and are complicit in Israeli crimes. In Europe, the population is different, because in Europe you have you can see this very clear gap between where the people stand and where the government stands. And when you talk to people, public opinion in Europe is very strongly pro-Palestinian, but that has not reached a point where it's affecting the governments, and that is unfortunate. Hopefully that will change sooner rather than later. And one of the reasons I believe that European governments have lately decided to recognize the state of Palestine, which does not exist, is as a gesture to relieve some of the pressure that's placed upon them by their constituents to support Israel less and to support the Palestinians more. So they figured, well, we can have this empty gesture of recognizing a state that does not exist, and maybe this will alleviate some of the pressure by our constituents. It's not working. It's not working.
Mika, you spoke of the violence in Israel and Palestine, saying that many individuals have been killed. You spoke of the 51-day war as well, stating that many individuals were killed during this war that was launched by the Israeli government. However, the claim that is made by the Israeli government about the involvement of Hamas, who is supporting Hamas? Is it the Palestinian government, or are they acting independently?
Well, Hamas was voted in democratic elections to represent the Palestinians. The Palestinians voted for Hamas. Mind you, it was a very long time ago. Israel did not permit elections since 2006, so that was a very long time ago. But Hamas is a resistance organization. Hamas is not the oppressor. Hamas is not the one who we need to look at. When you have a situation of oppression, we're going to have resistance. Hamas would not have been established had it not been for Israeli oppression. Because
oppression is oppression. Killing is killing, Miko.
Oppression is oppression, and oppression leads to resistance. And resistance to oppression takes all kinds of ways, and armed resistance, of course, is one path. So it's very easy to always blame the oppressed and saying that they need to be more polite, they need to be more kind, they need to be more friendly. But the reality is that the resistance is always the outcome of oppression. There has never been a security threat to Israel from Hamas. There has never been a security threat to Israel from Gaza. There has never been a security threat to Israel from Palestinians, ever. Palestinians have never had a tank. Palestinians have never had a single warplane. Palestinians have never had a regular army. Israel has one of the largest armies in the world, with a huge arsenal that is continuously being renewed and modernized with American weapons. Israel is able to, in 51 days, kill over 2,000 innocent Palestinians right in front of the world's very eyes. Palestinians have no such capacity. And so I think it's very, very clear that all the claims that Israel has made, Israel and the people who speak for Israel, that somehow murdering people in Gaza is an act of self-defense, you'd have to be completely deranged to accept it, or to.
Why would Israel have a air missile self-defense system if there is no threat from Hamas?
That's a very good question. I think it has to do with arms manufacturing. It has to do with profits from arms manufacturing. But
you mean to say some of the nation might declare war against Israel? Is that why they have a missile defense system?
Well, why does Israel have such a big army when Israel has no serious military enemies? Israel has no military threat. Certainly not from the Palestinians. The story of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is a story of colonialism. It's a story of oppression. It's a story of a violent, brutal regime, which is the state of Israel.
Why is the world turning a blind eye against these killings?
That's a very good question. I think the world has been inundated with misinformation. The world has been inundated with corrupt governments that are supporting Israel for their own benefits, for their own narrow interests. And the problem is that the governments tend not to support justice, but typically tend to support power. And that is the reality today, and that's why it is a cause for people. The Palestinian resistance and fights for justice always begin with grassroots movements.
Do you think that
that's the way
Palestinian Authority, Palestinian government, has the political will to solve this problem?
Absolutely not. Not the will or the ability. The Palestinian, like I said, the Palestinian Authority is not a representative government. It is it's not in a position where it can affect any change.
Sri Lanka has been a very close friend of the Palestinian government over the years. This we saw since the former regime came into power. We saw the president also making submissions saying that Palestine needs to be a free state. How do you see the involvement of Sri Lanka in the Palestinian cause?
Well, I think we need to look at the trade relations between Sri Lanka and Israel, and that really is the key issue. I think as long as countries, it's not only Sri Lanka, but other countries who suffered from colonization themselves, do business with Israel, then we see there's a problem. I think the key is to stop all trade with Israel. The key is to isolate Israel. The key is to send the Israeli ambassador home until such time as Israel is willing to behave in a more humane or in a way that is acceptable.
Okay, you are aware that there is no Israeli embassy in Sri Lanka?
I'd rather there's no Israeli embassy anywhere. I think Israel should be isolated completely, like South Africa, apartheid South Africa was at the time. I think there needs to be a complete boycott, a complete isolation, sanctions, and divestment from the state of Israel until such time as the siege of Gaza is relieved, is ended, until such time that all political prisoners are released, and until such time that Israel allows for real free and fair elections for Israelis and Palestinians to a real democratic state, to a real democratic regime. Until that time, there should be no trade with Israel, there should be no Israeli ambassador, and there should be no Sri Lankan ambassador in Tel Aviv.
Lands across the world, wars for lands across the world has never seen an end. Let's talk about Kashmir, it's still going on. Let's talk about the Gaza Strip, it's still going on. However, in Sri Lanka was able to eradicate brutal terrorist organizations in the country. What are the lessons that Palestinians can learn from the Sri Lankan context?
Well, I'm not an expert on the Sri Lankan context, I have to say, but I know clearly that in the case of Palestine, we have a case that is probably simpler to solve and simpler to understand than all of the other cases that you described. Here we have a clear case of a racist colonialist occupation of a country. We have a case of a brutal oppressive regime that has been keeping one nation keeping another nation under this oppressive regime for 70 years. The same can be said
about Palestine as well, isn't it?
Well, I'm talking about Palestine. I'm saying this is a case in
this is speaking against Israelis, but the same thing can be said by an Israeli.
No, it can't.
Against Palestine as well.
Palestinians have never oppressed, have never occupied, and have never ruled Israelis. This has been a single issue. It's been a one-sided issue from the very beginning. The state of Israel has been an apartheid state, not unlike South Africa, from the very beginning. The fact that people choose to not see it or choose to turn a blind eye is a different issue. But the reality is that it's a very simple, much simpler than some of the other causes, and the solution is far simpler, because in Israel and Palestine, and Israelis and Palestinians are very similar societies. Although they are segregated and they do live under different laws, they are very similar societies. They're highly educated societies. They have similar religions. They have similar languages. Islam and Judaism are very similar. Hebrew and Arabic are very similar. The possibility of establishing a single democracy that would be productive and would be effective in Palestine that includes Israelis and Palestinians living in peace is a very realistic and a very doable thing, far simpler than all the other conflicts that still exist around the world.
Thank you very much, Mika, for joining us this evening on our show. A pleasure to have you on board today.
Pleasure. Thank you.